Hello and welcome to the Murder Media Podcast, where we analyse and overthink true crime content. I'm your host, Dr. Stella Maria Gaynor. You can follow the Murder Media Project over on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at murdermedia81, and that's the numbers 81, or email me directly at murdermedia81@gmail.com. How is everyone doing this week? I hope you are all good. I've been on a little holiday with my fella. We went away for a couple of days to places that I chose to go to, which is a harder task than it sounds because he likes archaeology and history and really long walks and I don't. But I think I managed to find places that suit us both. We walked the Corpse Path in Swaledale, which is just what it sounds. It's an ancient old path that people would use to move the dead from one place to the other. So I guess from where they died to where they needed to be. I was reading lots of blogs about it before we went, and apparently there's a spectre of a headless black dog that's supposed to haunt a part of the Corpse Path, but it was absolutely pissing down and I didn't see the spectre of a black dog because I expect it was hiding away from the absolute pelting rain as we were walking up the hill. It was July in the Yorkshire Dales, and when it rains, it rains. And then we went up to the Poison Garden in Alnwick, which is spelled Alnwick, but I'm told that's not how they say it. It's a gated garden inside a bigger garden at Alnwick Castle, filled with plants that can kill you. So you have to go in on a tour, like you're not allowed to wander around by yourself, and you're absolutely not to touch or smell anything. One plant, which its name I can't remember, of course, is so vicious that it needs to be kept fully sealed in a box, and there are other poisonous plants which are just in cages, but one plant is so nasty that it's kept in a box. And also there they've got on the walls these they're like giant tombstones, I guess, that feature some serial killers which have used some plants to poison. So it's well worth a visit if you're up in the northeast of England. Anyway, I'm back now and we need to get back on with our exploration of murder media and to pick up where we left off last week. We're continuing with media that discusses Ted Bundy. Last week we looked at Conversations with the Killer and examined how the title sequence is more than a little bit problematic, and how the Netflix series continues with the narrative that Bundy was some kind of superhuman super monster, when in fact he was just a bloke. But if Bundy is made into a monster, then those that catch him are heroes. Conversations with the Killer was directed by Joe Berlinger, and the vast majority of those speaking in the documentary are men. So this week we're going to look at the same story when it's told by women. I'll see how I'm doing for time. I don't want this to be like an hour long, but there are 3 pieces of media that I want to talk about. Falling for a Killer, a documentary directed by Trish Wood, an episode of the My Favourite Murder podcast hosted by Karen Kilgraff and Georgia Hardstark, and an episode of Murder, Mystery and Makeup hosted by Bailey Sarian over on YouTube. Let's start with My Favourite Murder. The podcast launched in 2016, hosted by, as said, Karen Kilgraff and Georgia Hardstark. Each week, the hosts take turns to tell each other about a particular or favourite murder. One tells, the other listens and reacts, and like good friends chatting, there are lots of tangents and sidebars and sidetracks. Both hosts have backgrounds in comedy and stand-up, so while My Favourite Murder is a true crime podcast, it's also quite clearly a comedy podcast, so it's a hybrid. Fans of the podcast call themselves Murderinos, and the show's produced some excellent catchphrases, including fuck politeness and stay sexy and don't get murdered. Like many successful podcasts, the hosts take their podcast out on tour and they perform it live. The episode I want to discuss here is episode 61, which was recorded live at the Neptune Theatre. So this is a live show of their podcast rather than the two recording it at home in their studio. Now, the Neptune Theatre is located in the University District of Seattle, and Kilgraff, when it's her turn, announces to the crowd which murderer she is going to cover. Let's listen to that moment.
Well, bye. Take it away, Karen. And I really set you up for failure, didn't I? Nope. You want to know why? Why? Because I'm doing Ted Bundy. Oh! I mean, right? Like, that's... Come on. This is how we do it. Fucking dropping it and picking it back up. Fucking... And I'm like, what is this? Here's something meaningful. There now you go. Here's a super monster. Right. Here's your hometown super monster. Yeah. Congratulations. Way to go. I'm not gonna cry on this one. No. Well, but I am glad you did that. I think that means a lot. Those two. That's nice. Yeah, this is a nice little... This is a nice pairing. What are we talking about? What is this? This isn't a fucking cheese and charcuterie plate, man.
As Kilgraff makes this announcement, we can hear the audience roar in appreciation. Now, when I first heard this, when I was first researching this for a book chapter, on the first listen through of the podcast recording, that roar of appreciation made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like, it felt odd. Like, why would you cheer Ted Bundy? And what I've since kind of got to the bottom of with some other research and the research for this chapter is they're not cheering Ted Bundy. They're cheering that Karen and Georgia are going to tell this story, and it's a story that they know, and there's pleasure in knowing the story already. So the people of Seattle who have gone to watch a true crime podcast live, they know the Bundy story, surely. I don't think it can be anyone in that room is like, who is but this Bundy character? So there's pleasure in hearing the story again. And that's one of the things that we're getting to the bottom of with the Murder Media podcast. And we'll talk about it again in a few episodes' time when we come to Cult Leader with Spencer Henry, and when he does an episode on Jeffrey Dahmer. There's pleasure in knowing the story already, and the joy in hearing a person's particular perspective or take on it. So we hear the audience roar. The audience are very involved. It's a live recording, so we can hear them throughout, clapping and cheering and whatever. And the cheering continues from the Seattle locals as place names are read out during the retelling, and we hear the emotional reactions from the audience as details from the case are covered. And here we can unpack some of the often cited troublesome aspects of true crime. My favourite murder, either in pre-recorded podcast or live at the Neptune, is an oral retelling of murder stories which needs, says Amanda Greer, quote, an imaginative reconstruction of gruesome murders, which forces the listener, or in this case the audience member in the Neptune, to acknowledge their own complicity with the propagation of the details, end quote. Cheering at certain moments or details in the tale might seem illogical or even distasteful, but the affect heard on the live recording is both in response to revulsion at Bundy's actions and in sympathy and empathy with the victims and their families. For example, when Melissa Smith's name is read out as victim and the daughter of the Salt Lake City police chief, there's a clear burst of empathy from the crowd for her father. This empathy for the trauma felt by those involved offers a sense of communal commiseration. It's a collective therapy session for Seattle residents of the details of this story. I'm sure will always be raw and will always hit a nerve. This emotion comes with, as it's a true crime podcast hybridized with comedy, a tearing down of Bundy through comedic mocking of his actions, words, behaviour and his many failures. While, as Greer says, the images flicker in and out of the mind, and this is combined with the feel-good, and it gives positive and negative affects, which Tanya Horrick notes, in this combination of humour and horror as presented by the podcast hosts. Comedy has the capacity to address serious social issues, and as Wanda Sykes says, through comedy a person can, quote, speak up for people who don't have a voice. Comedy gigs are meant to be fun, and they're also a way to get to the very guts of an issue, which here in the My Favourite Murder gig is pointing to the continuing endemic violence against women. To quote Sykes again, under the cover of amusement, humour can serve as a source of empowerment, a strategy for outrage and truth-telling, a counter to fear, a source of joy and friendship, a cathartic treatment, and even a means of empathetic connection and alliance. End quote. We can absolutely hear all of those things in that recording from the Neptune. Kilgraff and Hardstark are wonderfully relentless in their mocking of Bundy, pulling away all those extraordinary, superhuman attributes that have been given to this very ordinary, less than mediocre man. Now, I won't try and repeat their jokes because I don't think that works, and I won't try and, quote their mocking because I can't emulate them, and they do say it best. Please do go listen to the podcast episode, which I will link in the show notes, of course. But their scathing rebuttals to Bundy's bullshit are absolutely joyful in the face of such horror. In an interview with Rolling Stone magazine, Kilgraff explained that these women who are victims of violence, like as enacted by Bundy, are so much more than, quote, chalk outline plot devices. In recasting and talking about these women as real people, and not just as sites to give yet more information for the usually male detectives to understand more about the usually male killers, Kilgraff and Hardstark give bodily autonomy back to the victims, and women more generally. The women who have been murdered lost their control, says Hardstark in the Rolling Stone interview, because, quote, some fucking guy feels like he has the authority to take her life, end quote. Now, this anger is mirrored in the crowd's reaction at the Neptune Theatre and in the millions of downloads of the podcast, and it speaks to the shifting sands in the way that these stories are told. Earlier I mentioned the catchphrase, "Stay sexy and don't get murdered," the phrase that closes the My Favourite Murder episodes. Tanya Horrocks says that the phrase neatly, quote, encapsulates the central premise that talking and joking about murder helps to ward off anxieties about violence, end quote. I would elaborate on that by looking at the stay sexy element of the phrase and how it makes an interesting point regarding post-feminist rhetoric around pride in female beauty and control on how women are perceived. So that's not to say that I think My Favourite Murder purposefully subscribes to any specific post-feminist framework, but it does recognise the idiosyncrasies of post-feminism, and the cult-like nature of the fandom around the show gives you a case of being in the know. So from the outside, Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered might be read as putting all the onus on survival on women, but for those inside the circle, those in the know, the fans, the murderinos, the phrase is a marker of audience participation, and it's about murderinos taking charge of their own bodies, how they think about their bodies, and how past experience and anxieties are understood by each other. And that's a really crucial thing here. With My Favourite Murder, and also with another podcast that I will get to at another point, All Killer No Filler, the fans of the podcast have formed independent communities within themselves, like away from the hosts, away from the podcast, that provide each other support, emotional. And I do believe that over COVID, like the deepest, darkest bits of lockdown, when people were losing jobs and stuff, the All Killer No Filler fans, who collectively call themselves legends, they were setting up financial support for each other. So, it creates these really incredible and useful and culturally valuable places of community. And this is even more so, I think. So while I do enjoy the "Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered" catchphrase, I think I prefer "fuck politeness" even better. So in this "fuck politeness" moniker, encapsulating the deep anger that we feel towards the ingrained societal notion that women should be quiet and women should be attentive, My Favourite Murder and its fans are crucial to the changing attitudes to women's place in society. You don't need to be polite, you don't need to smile because somebody told you to, and you don't owe anyone your time. And I think this is all wrapped up wonderfully in fuck politeness. So My Favourite Murder, with its fans, they're changing the attitudes towards those who commit violence and towards those who experience it. Victims no longer need to stay quiet. Women are speaking and they are mocking those that cause trauma. Women are telling and having their story heard in spaces away from male-dominated legacy media, with a comedic and cathartic emotional response which creates community, empathy, sympathy and support. So as is the title of this podcast episode, what else can they add? The My Favourite Murder hosts add a more progressive and constructive addition to the retelling of this well-worn story. January 2020 saw the full season drop of Falling for a Killer on Prime Video. I think Prime Video is the right way to say it. Amazon Video. Amazon Prime's shopping, isn't it? Prime Video, right? Something I should know. Media academic, whatever. So this 4-part documentary, be serious now, is directed by Trish Wood and tells the story from the perspective of the women who were directly involved. So Liz Kendall, longtime girlfriend of Bundy, and her daughter Molly feature heavily in the documentary, as well as a host of other women. Dr. Donna Schramm, a psychiatrist who knew Bundy. Barbara Winslow, University of Washington Radical Women's Group. Pi Bateman, she was a self-defense tutor. Jane Caputi, a feminist scholar. Joanne Tester, friend of Linda Healy. Phyllis Armstrong, friend of George Ann Hawkins. And Karen Sparks Epley, a survivor. We have Karen Skevlem, housemate of Linda Healy. Cheryl Martin of the Washington State Police, Kathleen McChesney, a detective, Jodie Zimmerman and Vivian Winters, sister and mother respectively of Susan Rancourt, Barbara Grossman, a TV reporter, Carol DeRonch, survivor, Raylene Shepherd, teacher at Debbie Kent School, and Diane Smith, who was friend of Carol Boone, and Polly Nelson, a lawyer who represented Bundy when he was on death row. It's worth pointing out here that Joe Berlinger's film Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Vile and Evil, or Shockingly Evil and Vile, whichever way around it is supposed to tell the story from Liz Kendall's perspective. In the introduction to the updated edition of Liz Kendall's book, The Phantom Prince, she says, quote, "I learned via the internet that a new Ted Bundy movie was being made and that the story was going to be told from the perspective of Bundy's girlfriend. I did a quick internet search and got 21,000 hits, all announcing the news about my story being told in a new movie. I was stunned. How could they ever tell the story without ever speaking to me?" End quote. Now, to be fair, Berlinger did eventually respect and act upon Liz and Molly's input, but dramatisation of any true story into film is by its very nature going to have to condense things, to have omissions, to fit the length of the format. So Liz and Molly's time spent with Bundy, you've got to condense that down into, the roughly 90-minute film. With that then, Liz and Molly then decided that it was time to tell their story in their actual own words, which led to the second edition of The Phantom Prince being published and the documentary Falling for a Killer being made. The Daily Dot reviewed Falling for a Killer, saying that, quote, "We see him for everything he was, bullshit artist, molester, rapist and killer. No time is wasted trying to humanise him. Bundy is shown as the wolf in sheep's clothing that he was." End quote. As well as looking at the story as told by women, Falling for a Killer situates the story in its context, the social, cultural and political context. Second-wave feminism was encouraging activism, education and individual autonomy in terms of fertility. Women could now choose when to, or even if to, have kids, get married and stay home. It is significant then that at this profound and crucial historical moment for women, Bundy and others enact their rage and violence on women. The opening minutes of episode 1 of Falling for a Killer are seething with anger, and hopefully you've watched it by now, but it is fantastic. Let's listen to the trailer.
This story has been told many times by men. Now's the time to talk about our own story from beginning to end, because we lived and so many people didn't. It was a liberating time.
Women have a fundamental right to control their own bodies.
And we don't want to be sexual objects.
I want to have the right to be a human being.
I was the first female television reporter in Utah.
There were no other women in my police academy class, but I didn't let any of that stand in my way.
You're starting to feel like you can do anything, and all of a sudden, you get walloped.
It just stopped us in our tracks. Whoa, here we are, and girls are disappearing.
What happened here? There were dozens of theories, and there were very few clues.
It was my first night that I went out dancing in Seattle. He said his name was Ted.
We were like a family.
I just didn't think he could do these things.
Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Smile, Ted.
Women like us, women that have been attacked, women that are survivors, they keep their secrets to themselves.
But not any longer.
I fell in love with him from day one, but there are all these coincidences. I couldn't let it go.
Well, it takes a great amount of courage to turn in someone whom they're involved with.
After he was arrested, he wrote me many, many letters. We started life together. No goodbyes, just I love you.
A lawyer's dream is to represent somebody on death row. I had joined forces with a guilty and remorseless killer.
Ted Bundy wasn't a Charles Manson type person. He was the guy next door. That moment, I realized how so many girls went with him.
I feel like speaking out because women's lives are still secondary to men and somewhat expendable. My daughter's missing.
What you do with the bodies disappearing?
A little girl was murdered.
I'm hoping that this is the end of anything related to Ted.
Falling for a Killer presents a raw and emotional response to the recounting of the story by Liz, Molly and all the other women present. Their grief, their guilt, their sorrow are clear from the outset. The trauma is explained by the women as they speak about their experience to either themselves or someone that they knew. Details about the victims are explored, who they were, what they liked and what they hoped for. The bodies of the victims, which we do not see in Falling for a Killer as crime scenes, are instead shown as living, breathing people. Joanne Tester, Phyllis Armstrong and the others talking recall the warm and wonderful lives they were having with the women before their lives were taken. Stella Brusi, she's back, wrote about the development and codes of true crime genre and that they revel in evidence verite. Or is it verite? I don't know how to say it. And I've confused myself because I've written it here in my script in capital letters to make sure I say it right. And I've got it wrong again. Stella Brusi says that the camera pores over crime scenes, autopsy photos and in-court reactions. The imagery is always in intimate close-up to heighten the effective response. In Falling for a Killer, we have the same visual intimacy as the women speaking are framed in head and shoulders close-up. But Instead of poring over crime scene photographs or imagery of bones and corpses, Falling for a Killer instead presents an emotional verite as an extensive collection of photographs from Liz and Molly and Ted in various domestic scenes are examined in the same close-up detail. Now, this continues across the 4 parts of the series, as Laura Healy, sister of Linda Healy, speaks over the Healy family archive of photos and home video footage of the young Linda and her family. Stitched together in a montage showing Linda grow up, we hear the hopes and dreams of Linda, her personable nature about how she used to always sing at home, and the heartbreaking loss her family felt. This emotional verite, presented in Falling for a Killer, gives a clear identity back to Linda and to the other women taken, an identity that had been stripped away by previous tellings of the Bundy case, where they were named only as victims and described only with what Bundy did to them. Okay, I'm well aware of time, but I'd like to wrap up our exploration of Bundy and to get rid of him for a good long time and quickly look at Murder, Mystery and Makeup from Bailey Sarian. Bailey Sarian is, or she started anyway, as a beauty YouTuber doing the makeup tutorials and product reviews. Now she does Murder, Mystery and Makeup, and she does Dark History, which is, Dark History is also a podcast as well, so that's worth a listen for sure. So where does Murder, Mystery and Makeup, how did it start? So in 2018, the Chris Watts case blew up across media. Do you remember that? So he was a family annihilator because he was having an affair, and rather than behave like an adult and, sort everything out and deal with it and, leave his wife and get a divorce, he just killed them all. He killed his wife and 2 children. Good dick that he is. Anyway, the story was everywhere. There's a Netflix documentary about it. I think it's called American Murder Next Door, something like that. And Bailey wanted to talk about it because everybody was. So she made a video discussing the case, and just talking to a camera feels pretty awkward. It feels pretty damn awkward me just sitting here talking into this mic and you can't even see my face, so I understand. So she did her makeup at the same time. In later interviews, Bailey said it was simply just to keep her hands busy while she talked because of the awkwardness of just talking to a camera. Her subscribers loved it. And in this video, the Murder, Mystery and Makeup series was born. When I initially researched this and wrote about it, her channel had 6.46 million subscribers. That's a hell of a lot. And the makeup tutorial has become it's a stalwart of YouTube, isn't it? Like, I mean, YouTube runs on algorithms like Netflix does, but with different reasons for the algorithm, and we'll get into that in a future episode. But when I open my YouTube homepage, it will look different from yours, just as my Netflix homepage looks different from yours, etc. But when I open my YouTube homepage, it's pretty much just makeup tutorials. I do enjoy a makeup tutorial, and it's but it's got that thing where because it's women's things, it's under-examined in terms of scholarship, despite the format making millions, billions probably, in revenue for YouTube. Now, as I mentioned back in the introductory episode, true crime is seen as for women and therefore not particularly worthy of study, and the same goes for the makeup tutorial. Bailey made a murder, mystery and makeup video on Bundy, which again, when I was researching this about, 2 years ago, yeah, wow, 2 years ago that I was researching for the chapter where all this has come from. Anyway, the video on Bundy had nearly 9 million views. The video follows the usual structure of a makeup tutorial and YouTube content. So Bailey addresses the camera directly. She speaks in a casual, friendly manner that creates a sense of intimacy, like it's a gossipy chat between friends, really. Bailey has a girl next door sensibility. She's relatable, she's knowable, and she doesn't try to be perfect. In fact, one thing that a subscriber to her channel can count on is Bailey mispronouncing words and place names. And, she's never going to hear this, but solidarity. Bailey, I can't speak either. So it was obviously a good idea to start a podcast. Anyway, the videos feature side notes, distractions, again adding to this feeling of a chat between friends. So after the opening moments of Bailey's Bundy video, she does her introduction, nudge to like and subscribe like all YouTubers does, and then she explains why she's been reluctant to cover Bundy. Let's hear her say it.
This week, I thought I would do a very highly requested video, which is on, you probably saw the title and the thumbnail. Today, we're going to be talking about Ted Bundy. Like I had mentioned in the Jeffrey Dahmer video I had done, which I will link down below if you haven't seen it, I get requested to do these two people the most. Jeffrey Dahmer, which we did, and Ted Bundy, always. And for a long time, since the beginning I started this whole series, I've been putting off doing both of them because I just felt like, what can I add to the story? Like, everything Everything has literally been said. What else can I add? What else would you hear that is new? I overthink everything. That's why I just been putting it off, because I was like, what can I add? Nothing. It's all been said. But I have to give the people what they want, and they've been asking for Mr. Bundy. So I just have to mention that Ted Bundy, there are tons of TV shows, TV series, docuseries, movies, books, so many articles and movies and content out there about Ted Bundy and the whole story. So I am just going to keep it kind of simple, I guess, or more just straight to the point, like what he did and that stuff, okay? Yes, just kind of like boom, boom, boom. I tried to lay this out in a way that made sense. At least it made sense in my mind. So I will stop rambling because I do this a lot, and let's just jump right into it.
Bailey seeks to keep the story as factual and simple as possible. Her approach is in contrast to My Favourite Murder and Falling for a Killer, in that Bailey seeks to be more impartial, and her emotional response to the case and the crimes is somewhat dispassionate. Now, that's not to say that Bailey is cold. The opposite with her personality and her tone. She's very warm and friendly. It's more that Bailey wants to stick to only the facts in her awareness of the vast amount of material that already exists on Bundy. So you can hear in the clip that she felt the same way about doing the Dahmer story as she does with Bundy's story. It's so overdone that she rightly questions what else can she add. Bailey's videos are similar to a podcast in that the story is recounted orally and that the subscriber, or the viewer, reconstructs the image in their own head. So I touched on this in the introductory episode. Bailey replaces the usual supplied imagery of the torn and violated female body that we might see on a TV documentary, such as Conversations with a Killer, which does show us human remains and bones. Bailey replaces this with her own attractive and pretty face, applying makeup as a highly feminine act juxtaposed with the hyper-masculine violence in the story. Female bodily destruction is replaced with female body celebration in the art of Bailey's makeup application and in her many colourful tattoos. Bailey in this Bundy video is telling a story of extreme violence against women, but in her usual thoughtful yet temperate delivery is a resistance against the usual, as Greer notes, visualisation of mutilated female bodies. Mark Seltzer wrote that we live in a wound culture where the, quote, endless spectre of torn and opened bodies permeates all media, end quote. He says these bodies become public property, objects that become spectacle, something just to be looked at and stared at. In not showing the bodies, not showing the remains, Bailey affords the women that were killed a degree of privacy not usually given to them. Okay, I'm well aware of the time, I don't want to keep you much longer, so just one more point on Bailey Sarian. She asks what else can she add to the story that's been told and retold of Ted Bundy. And what I think is most significant is what Bailey leaves out, what she doesn't tell us. Bailey does not name the victims. She says that she does not want to speak for them or their families. She has no permission to name them, and perhaps the most interesting and important action that Bailey takes here is not reducing these women to this one moment of their lives. In an interview with The Guardian, I'm sure it was The Guardian, I'll try and find it and link it in the show notes, she says, quote, I feel like I can't speak for them unless I'm speaking to the family directly. They've lived such full lives, why be remembered for this one thing? End quote. By not naming names, Bailey is giving these women back some autonomy and their right to self-govern whether or not their names are public property, or whether or not they are used in this story which has been told so many times. The story seems almost mythic, almost unreal. A person's name is their identifier, with deep personal and familial connections. By not naming them, Bailey, again in her thoughtful and temperate manner, severs the connection between them and Bundy, giving them the chance to be their own private people away from his disgusting actions. When the women are named in Falling for a Killer, it's by those that knew and loved them, and they are talked about and remembered for who they were, and not just as a list of women who were murdered. Okay, I'm done. So everything that I've talked about in this episode can be found with more detail in my chapter, which also has another really long title, something I am going to work on. And the chapter's called What Else Can I Add? Inverting the Narrative Through Female Perspectives in Falling for a Killer, My Favourite Murder and Murder Mystery and Makeup. And the book that the chapter is in is an edited collection called True Crime in American Media, and it's edited by George Lark Walsh, published with Routledge. I'll link it in the usual place. Now next week, life depending, I hope to bring in a guest so it's not just me yip-yapping about murder media next time, and we'll be discussing some broader questions around murder media, and I'll throw those questions out to you as well, and you can let me know what you think on the Facebook page or the Instagram post for that episode. Do go and check out the media that I've discussed today. So Falling for a Killer is again on Prime Video. My Favourite Murder is a podcast available in all the podcast places and it's free. And Bailey Sarian is on YouTube also for free. Follow the Murder Media Project over on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at murdermedia81. That's the numbers 81. Or my email again is murdermedia81@gmail.com. And you'll find all episodes linked via the WordPress site and Podbean. Thanks for listening. Hope you all have a good week and goodbye.